Hi everybody, my name is Martin Stewart. I am a writer of children's and young adult fiction based in Troon. Previously I was a teacher, I was an English teacher, and that split context is really what fuels a lot of my work, and certainly a lot of my working time, because most of my working time prior to COVID restrictions coming in was really spent back in the classroom as a sort of consultant, delivering writing workshops and sort of master classes on the folio, and doing work with broad general education classes and things, which has been great. It's really kept me in touch with school and with that environment and with the kind of thing the kids are doing. And it stops the writing being such a sort of lonely, odd experience, which it really was. It was a big switch to go from the classroom to just sitting in the house on my own, trying not to watch Homes Under the Hammer, So that's what I do. And what I'm going to be talking about today is my books, and the approach that I think I would take. It was an interesting question to be asked, and I'm really pleased to be asked to speak today about how I would approach teaching them, because my instinct is to teach writing and creative writing. And I know, sort of anecdotally, spending a lot of time in schools, mostly in Scotland, but all the way down to like Oxfordshire in the south of England, is that teaching creative writing is something that gives people pause, and it's something that also is, I think, sort of awkwardly fit in amongst everything else. When we've got Scottish text and critical essay and RUAE and everything else to teach in the upper school, it becomes something that we sort of need to find time for. So I'm going to be thinking about how I would teach my first book, Riverkeep, which is on the screen just now, this one, which came out in 2016, as a class text, focusing on structure as a sort of means of accessing it, and specifically thinking about the context in which I came about its publication, because that, I think, is the most interesting aspect of the story, and it's something that I think really helps me crack into working with classes and working with young people who really have that sort of blank page terror and are intimidated by the prospect of writing. That X-ray, which the kids always really enjoy, especially in the younger school. This is my right knee. This is totally connected to the writing, so stick with me. I broke my kneecap when I was playing football with the staff in James Hamilton Academy in Kilmarnock, doing my probation year. I subsequently broke it again halfway up a hill in the Galloway Forest on a Duke of Edinburgh walk with some really nice third-year kids. And I had to hurple about 1.5 miles back to the minibus down the hill on a split kneecap, which was pretty hardcore, and I think would make a good film someday. But I was off work for 3 months after that. I got this operation, which is where this X-ray comes from. And I always show the kids this because there's been, just as a sort of visual impact, they always like the sort of slightly barbaric looking screws coming out the back, but it really is connected to the writing, because when I was off work, having at that point tried to be a writer for about 10 years probably, I was sort of late 20s, 30 at this point. I'd really decided I wanted to do it when I was about 19. I was off work for 3 months. I had my operation on the Monday after I should have gone back after the October week, and was off then through to New Year, through Christmas. It was fantastic, and obviously I came back thinking somebody will have done my folios for me and everything. It didn't quite turn out like that. But in my intense boredom, having thought, this will be great, I'll catch up on my reading, I wrote a short story as a favour for somebody. And this is it here. It was 1,800 words, took me a couple of days. It's four pages, 4 pages. And the circumstances of my publication then, and the reason that this is connected to the writing and why I wanted to talk about it, is that Penguin subsequently bought that 4-page story to be turned into a full-length novel. And that's why I left teaching, and how I came to be writing full time. It is not because I got loads of money, which is what the kids that I was teaching. I left Christmas 2014 when I was teaching Kyle Academy in Ayr. So the kids obviously thought that I'd been given a sort of giant cheque and was just going off to hang out with J.K. Rowling and didn't need to work anymore. That's really not the case. I had 4 pages, an 1,800 word story, and my contract was to turn that into a full-length book of about 80,000 words. 70 to 80 was the contract. The finished book is 86,000 words. In 4 months, I had to deliver it by April. So I had nothing at this point. And I think this is my way into talking to the kids about the book, is getting rid of that sense of the sort of immutable nature of a finished text. You know, they get, you know, of Mice and Men or whatever it is, boom, and it sits there as like this sort of cube of steel. It is this finished thing that's been found intact, you know, like a fossil. And I really want to talk to them about the sort of organic nature of what I do, and, you know, by modelling my mistakes and things, and show the process, and to really model the process. So I had to come up with a story to fill a whole book very, very quickly, and I had nothing, which led to my next slide, which is this, which is really how I had to sort of think about what I was doing. I had to go down to, or I got to go down to Penguin. I got a day off school to go down and read the short story as it was, that 4 pages to the children's division. And I had all these people coming up to me and saying, oh, you know, we can't wait to read the book. And I was going, because I had nothing, you know. And I really like to talk to the kids about that and to sort of bring them into what I had to do. I mean, another example of that is here on my next slide. This is the map that's in at the start of the book. So it is here. I always like maps in books, but I had an email one day. Here it is from my editor to say, oh, could you send us your map? And sure, absolutely. And I didn't have one. And at that point, this is my first book. I had a sort of slight panic, thinking everybody else must have a map. This must be a thing that people have. So this here, and this, I actually found this literally just the other day, which was so fortuitous because I thought it had been lost. This is my original map that I had drawn here in the slide. This is the map of the city of Glasgow. And if I knock that a little bit off to the side, you can see exactly, it just overlays perfectly. I mean, this, because I wanted a sort of Glaswegian-ness, a sort of texture, even though it's in a fictional world, I wanted something about it to feel Glaswegian. So I just used the map of the city of Glasgow. That's roughly the shape of the Clyde and the Clyde estuary there. And at the top left, you've got Arn and the Holy Isle. You know, it was just brought together, you know, and it's not something that, as I say, that has been sort of dug out of the ground intact. It was a process of creation, you know, through which many mistakes were made. And so it's this, here on my next slide, this is really what I'm saying here, is that young readers often, I think, treat every text as though it's been dug out of the ground, fully formed. And by emphasising process, especially redrafting, because, you know, they don't read, especially boys, you know what it's like, they don't redraft. Discussing that balance between careful planning and that sort of seat of the pants invention, I hope to demystify and humanise writing, and to place my writing within the context of pupils' classroom work. Because whenever I'm in schools, I really don't want to sort of swoop in from an ivory tower and show them, this is how I write a 100,000 word book, see you later. This is what you're doing. And this, you know what it's like, we all get conscripts in the classroom. If you're an English teacher, you've got, you know, we get everybody. But they need to do it. And so that's when I ask them to put their hands up and, you know, who wants to be a writer? There are very few of them. But the point that I always make to them, they're all writers. If they wish to present themselves as National 5 candidates and higher candidates, they are all writers. And this really is not, I mean, we're looking at it in the context of writing stories as well, and of writing and reading stories, but it's about mastery of language, ultimately, and literacy, and this is obviously what we all need. One last example of the sort of fortuitous nature of how this kind of stuff comes together, going back to my original map here on the next slide, the book munch character, which I've circled there, who is a reasonably pivotal character in the story in that he's very minor but has a sort of thematic weight in terms of what he teaches the protagonist. He wasn't in any version of it until pretty far on, until my wife and I went to this exhibition at the British Library in London in January 2015 here. This is Terror and Wonder, the Gothic Imagination, which was actually sort of disappointing. It was a lot of, you know, first editions of Varney the Vampire in a glass case type thing. There's only so much you can get out of that. But on the way out, there was a temporary exhibit about Arctic exploration, which had this sort of stuff here on the next slide, that, you know, a sort of Victorian age icebreaker. And it had a story about a bunch of guys who got stuck on one of these things for, you know, an extended period of time and ate their boots. And that's here on the next slide, a perfectly exemplified pair of old boots. And that really stuck in my head. And this is the kind of thing I talk to the kids about, you know, the ideas of the easy bit. If you come across these sort of things, it's about a preparedness to sort of see them, and that's where that came from. It changed the story, it helped tighten up the sort of thematic impact of what I was wanting to talk about, which was a sort of the nobility of his servitude and the kind of dignity and work and tradition and the importance of his family and things came through this character who otherwise wouldn't have existed if we had gone out a different door in the library. And I think that that sort of fortuitousness and fluidity is part of turning the steel cube of a finished novel into something more malleable for them, something a little bit more like clay that seems a bit less intimidating. So here, just on the next slide here, this is the book munch on the finished map, who lives in a place called the Drebin Woods. The Drebin Woods are named for, on the next slide, this man, Frank Drebin, of Police Squad, played by Leslie Nielsen. It's not all Shakespeare and Frankenstein references, you know. So what I had then in terms of the story, and I'd said this was on the first slide, looking at it from the point of view of a quest narrative, because something that I think is, you know, that we know it's very important, is to build on pupils' prior understanding and prior learning. And they are all really very good at this. I think it's about, even non-readers, it's about the consumption of narrative and the instincts that everybody has for that. So I had Will, who's the main character, here. And what Will does, as a very sort of quick overview of the text, is he does the work of the Glasgow Humane Society, which I had read about in a Sunday newspaper, which is where I got the short story when I was off work with that sore knee. And so he rescues people, he looks after the river, and he recovers the bodies of people who've drowned in the river, which is what George Parsonage on the Clyde, I'm pointing in the general direction of the Clyde here, until he very recently retired, about sort of 4 or 5 months ago. That's what he had done his whole life. And so I took that idea and I made it the Riverkeep, like a nice portmanteau. And so the main character, Will, is 15. He's going to take over as Riverkeep when he's 16, which is in a week's time, but he does not want to. And before he can run away, his dad goes to pull a body out of the river, but it pulls him back under. And when his dad comes back to him, he's changed in some way. And that was it. That was the end of the short story. So I had Will in this boathouse with his dad. And that was the point that I was at when I had gone down to read at Penguin. And all these, oh, I can't wait to read the book. I'm going, because I didn't know what happened to his dad. I didn't know what they could possibly do stuck in this house. And, you know, the contract was for 70 to 80,000 words. And I had no interest really in writing a sort of stuck in the house book, which, you know, a sort of haunted house that I didn't, you know, or like a zombie story. I didn't want to do anything like that. It wasn't interesting to me. And it's never going to be interesting to read then. So I did something then that I always advocate for young writers is to take two ideas and put them together and make a sort of compound. And I had a superimposed sketch here from my original map. I had a sea monster in another story I had written, which was a sort of love letter to Jaws, which is obviously, I'm sure everybody will agree, the greatest film ever made, and an underrated book as well. I really love Jaws. So I had this sea monster in the sea. If I added him in and made that sort of compound, and I had Will, you know, suddenly it started to come together, you know. So this was the sea monster as done by an actual artist on the next slide, which was significantly better than my sketch. So the narrative then was, how do I get them together? Well, Will then goes down the water. He doing the water. He goes on this journey, and that in a position of having to come up with a story really quickly suddenly became a really sturdy hook to hang a story on, a quest narrative. I understand this. I knew what to do with it, and readers understand it. It contains its own momentum, and that's a really important thing, and it's something that all young learners really understand. So if I brought in the sea monster then, and he's, you know, what reason does he have? And it's interrogating that and asking these questions that help me build the story. So in the next slide here, this is what I'm talking about in terms of building on pre-existing learning and understanding. All learners are skilled consumers of narrative. So, I mean, be that through film, TV, video games, books, they know how these things work. And I mean, even in video games, and I don't play video games anymore. Very much, you know, but I did, and it's interesting, I think, talking to kids sometimes, because although it seems like a sort of mindless abdication of thought, it's really not. It has its own nuance and its own structure, and they get this. They understand it on you know, quite profound levels. What happened as well, I mean, another example, like giving them, you know, they can turn on a film that they've never seen before, just randomly on TV, and know instantly that it's nearly finished, you know, by the pitch of the music, by the nature of the action, by the physical condition of the characters. And, you know, very much, I mean, Will in this book is absolutely torn to bits by the end of it. I mean, if you stood him at the end of the book beside his, you know, his self from the start, he would look like this shred of a boy, you know, and that's part of it. We put them through the mill and they get that, you know. They can predict the nature of the challenge in a new level of a video game. I think, you know, it's that, you know, real sort of specificity. But also, I mean, this is my second book here. They can tell you exactly what happens in my second book based on the cover and the rules of the sacrifice box, which are here. And if anybody has seen the film Gremlins, you will know how much this is ripped off from the film Gremlins. Let's call it an illusion. Which are never come to the box alone, never open it after dark, never take back your sacrifice. And kids who are not readers at all and would identify themselves as being sort of almost hostile to reading can tell you based on the cover of that book, without looking at the back or anything, somebody breaks the rules in that book. And so they understand how these things work. And if you can harness that from the beginning, it's something that really, really lets them, you know, explore the rest of it with so much confidence. So I had Will here on the next slide in his boathouse, marked with the X. He's going to go down on this journey. And it means then that we have these key points on the way. And these are key incidents. This is something that we always talk about in terms of asking kids to explore a novel. And I think within a quest narrative, it's a really useful thing to do, as opposed to something like, you know, we're going very further upper school. I mean, this I would say is, you know, most appropriate for third or fourth year. But, you know, something like Gatsby, which is a little bit more shapeless and sort of social. We're looking for the, you know, the key incidents. With something like a quest narrative, they go from point A to point B. And so learners' skill in consuming and interpreting narrative, with a quest narrative, they understand that key incidents will appear periodically in order to test or develop the protagonist, and they will happen. You've got a physical space in which that's expected to happen. You can plot them on a map. And it means then, of course, that the biggest incident here comes at the end, you know, and learners also understand that destination that Will or any character in a quest novel, that his destination is both physical and emotional, that the physical journey is a framework upon which to hang the emotional. That's how that works, that's where it takes him. So narrative structure then, in terms of thinking about this, the quest narrative in the book, it feels plot because it told me what was going to happen. If he's going to go down the river, and that was something that I started with, that's what built the story. You know, that it really drives that. It drives the pace because, of course, we'll get quickenings of pace at these key incidents when you're looking for moments of tension or trying to draw out the theme with particular challenges that Will has to face. It changes the tone because, of course, the tone will change with, you know, in relation to those moments. The key incidents themselves, the setting, because the place has to change, and the nature of those places has to tie in thematically as we move along, and character. And it really made a huge difference to character. And character is really central to all reading, of course, but also writing. And I think thinking about connecting how we read and how we write, looking at this here on the next slide, markers of folio in recent years have noted that some candidates, and this is their phrasing, concentrated on plot when writing short stories, creating complicated and unrealistic narratives rather than character or atmosphere. And this is something, you know, if you're marking folio pieces, National 5 especially, and higher, it's the then he went, then she ran, then. It's stuff and content. And it's a whole story, you know, it's a whole action movie condensed into, you know, 999 words. And it's just stuff. And I think flipping it back and focusing on character is how we access our text, because we look at how the characters develop and we look at how we know what they're feeling and all that kind of thing. And it's something that I think, you know, needs to be brought into writing as much as possible. This line here, this is something that really changed how I approached my writing when I was trying to get published, which is an Elmore Leonard line, which is that people read for people. And they're liable to skip ahead. You know, we all know the bits that we skip in books when you can see that it's just more description of a forest for the rest of the page. Your eyes sort of skim it a little bit. People read for people. That's what drives it, and there aren't enough characters, and this is what the markers are saying themselves, there is not enough character in the writing that kids are producing for their folio. So my characters are formed by their environment very much, and dictated to by that quest narrative which drove the plot and the structure and the setting and where they were going to be. So the sort of Dickensian Victorian milieu that I ended up with from this short story and was then pinned into when it was sold, when I'd sold the rights, lent itself to elements of the grotesque, of that slightly sort of florid overwriting. while the Glasgow-esque nature of the world that I was trying to achieve demanded a certain pattern of speech and dialogue. Character is key then, and this should be reflected in learners' writing. So I'm going to read a little bit quickly that I'll come on to sort of exemplify with what I'm talking about in a wee second. This is the introduction to Murda, who is the sort of Captain Ahab of this book. In the guts of the hell song sat its captain, Gilt Murda, turning a lump of ivory in hands that were 3 fingers short and thick with dirt. 5 of his crew were cramped beside him, awaiting his word. In the doorway lurked the wide-eyed cabin boy, Sam John, snatching conversation between the table's kicking feet. The hatches had been battened somewhere over the Keppel Sound in the face of a storm that dropped the barometer's quicksilver almost out of sight, and the galley's air had grown sour in the hours since. A tang of sweat, fish, and false itch-making heat crawled in the skin of the crew and into their mouths and noses. Murda was unaware of the stifling atmosphere. Decades at sea had chewed him to a strip of teak-strong gristle, and he no longer tasted the well-lived air. He had about his face a thick clod of beard, lumped by tangles and tar and livened by the bright flash of scar tissue. Beneath a curtain of once injured flesh glowed his blood-stained left eye. His right, deep-set and sun-browned skin was grey and hard. From the floor came the scrape of his whalebone leg against the deck's grain, and he bumped the sharp point of his iron crutch in distracted rhythm. Murda lifted his long nose and opened his mouth, tasting the air. He turned the piece of ivory again, knocked it on the table, then smiled at the men and women before him, running his tongue over teeth that were ribbed with grime. "We's here," he said quietly. "Let's hunt." So, thinking about the sort of the kind of density of those characters is something that's a really useful way of finding its way into writing. I'm going to skip across that last slide. Actually, I'll come back to the sacrifice box dialogue. This is a writing activity in terms of focusing on the broadly creative writing at National 5. So looking at the conventions of imaginative writing in line with that feedback from the SQA that's looking for more character. And so the best way to support your own writing skills is to read quality texts as often as you can. Quality texts, of course, like mine, which are, I can't stress enough, highly recommended and widely available for sale, both online and in high street retail stores. But authors always mimic other writers. This is a bit, it's that magpie thing, and steal phrases, descriptions, and ideas. So this is something that was put together from a school I'd visited, which is my old school, Kyle Academy in Ayr, from the visiting author's novel Riverkeep. So it's the level of description of one of his characters is certainly something worth mimicking. And there's that description of Murda about being chewed to a strip of teak-strong gristle. And we're looking at picking out elements of that to imitate in their own writing. So colour and the light, that teak-strong, that bright flash, the blood-stained, here on the next slide, the character's name. Murda sounds like an antagonist. That he was called Vor Pearsall, which I sort of shudder. I quite like telling the kids these things. You need to tell them your mistakes as well. He was called that for 8 of the 9 drafts or whatever it was that this book went through. And then he became Gilt Murda, which is so much better for a sort of slightly ineffable reason, but he sounds antagonistic and he's not going to be the hero. That's something that I think the kids can, they always have quite a lot of fun with. And I focus on his face. So now you're going to use that as a model for the inspiration for a short writing task. And this is, on the next slide here, this is the writing activity. So to write a few sentences describing a character and the style of that model, using the name, thinking about the colour and the light, thinking about their facial features. And then, and this is the sort of key bit down the bottom here, unpicking that description. It's that focus on process and thinking about what's been done, having the language to say, I did this because. And I think, that's much more significant in terms of developing their writing skills and of really getting into work with the sample of the text than their actual writing. It's that reflective process is what will really develop their skills. And I think I've flashed up there just the phrase modelling wherever possible. Because this is a skill, and we're always really keen to talk about English as a skills subject, especially around sort of folio time when the results are stacked up against maths, but it's still only November, I think, it was something I just never did when I was teaching. But, you know, any other skill, you know, if you go for like a golf lesson or, you know, go into a pottery class or something, the process that you are attempting to perfect is always modelled. I mean, literally, you know, you think about up in art, the teacher will sit down and they'll draw the feather or the crushed can of Coke, much beloved of art corridors, you know. They will draw it and you know, it's that demonstration. I think we, as teachers and leaders of education, we should be writing. And that's the best way, I think, to bring them inside the process. Rather than just being like, here is a finished book, when you get that steel cube. It's something like, we're going to do a quick writing exercise. I'm going to do it too. We're all going to write for 10 minutes. And having the confidence to, you know, to put up your own mistakes and to get inside that process, I think is transformative in terms of what the kids write and in terms of enabling confidence in their own mistakes. This then on the next slide here, this is a sample of National 5 fourth year pupils' work. And I'll read the extract. Mal's face had been chiselled into such a shape that it appeared to be able to carve out a valley. Her head yielded an awful set of hair that was so patchy that she could be mistaken for somebody 40 years older. Places of perfect shining skin were in a minority to the dull scars riddling her angular face, making her appear like a badly made patchwork quilt that follows no pattern nor abstract beauty. Protruding cheekbones set her eyes deep inside the cave that was her face, yet her eyes were beads of jet black ink that seemed to be obsolete for any other function than to drill deeply inside me. It's absolutely savage, obviously, but really dense in a way that I think, you know, kids don't naturally do. You know, this is somebody of, you know, sort of moderate ability. But it's the bit down here. It's the unpicking of the description at the bottom of that slide, where her name Mal was chosen to reflect her malicious nature and evil mind. Nobody would expect love and peace from a character named after Malus or Malum, which is Latin for evil. A good bit of Googling there, I think. Her face is angular, ugly and unwelcoming, dull scars riddling her angular face. The one down at the bottom, eyes are usually how you can understand a person and see how they're feeling towards you. Mal's eyes are sunk within her face and appear obsolete. That process of being able to pick apart even one thing, you know, this is quite dense, but even one aspect of what they have written, and I think especially for boys, to be able to actually engage more with that process, I think is really, really transformative. And it's, you know, as I say, using the, you know, the text as a basis for that and you know, really pulling it apart and getting inside that process. So I'd said I was going to go back to the dialogue, the sacrifice box dialogue. Because when I'm talking about, you know, character, these are our descriptions of characters in terms of our jumping off point for the writing, from which, you know, setting and everything else can kind of spiral. But dialogue is something that I think that people are also really apprehensive about writing. And that's because I think when dialogue is used in the kind of stories that kids normally write, which is this stuff, you know, the plot-led content, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. You end up with a paragraph and, you know exactly what it's like, 2/3 of the page, that's all just, then he ran up the stairs, then the vampire jumped out, then he stabbed the vampire with a stake, then he ran down the stairs. And they get then one sentence, in the middle of the page, there's one bit of dialogue, and it's usually something quite filmic, like, let's get out of here. And if you're only going to use a small bit of dialogue, it puts a lot of pressure on it, as though it has to be something sort of profound. And of course, you know, it really doesn't. Dialogue is how we connect to characters in such an enormous way. I'm going to read the introduction to the character of Mario, who's Sepp in the Sacrifice Box, works in a chippy after school, and he works for a man named Mario. Mario is always everybody's favourite character, which I was really going for. And this is his introduction. He's an enormous Greek guy. His name is Christos, but he looks like Mario because he's got a moustache, and this is set in the 80s. So here he is. Hi Mario, said Sepp, was she all right? Mario waved his hands. Fainted, you know, blah, he said, rolling his eyes up and lolling his tongue. He's always a dead dog, and I kill dog, so, you know, she upset. You didn't. You need to stop saying that. You put the dog down. There's a difference. Dog is dead, said Mario, spreading his palms. He was washing the rubber table, arms sheathed to the elbow in rubber gloves. A fat, not-fur dog lay in a trolley under a plastic sheet, stinking of disinfectant and its last terrified shit. I know, but the wording is kind of important, said Sepp. People won't bring their animals to a vet who kills them. Mario frowned. But sometimes this is exactly what they bring dog for, he said patiently. For death. To be put... Never mind, said Sepp, as Mario scraped the suds into a bucket and stripped off his gloves. always like this with little volunteer from school. They want brush ponies, make happy time with animals, but I hurt the animals. I kill them. Every day I kill them. I see the eyes in their heads looking at me. It's so sad, you know. But I kill them because it's my job. Sometimes death is great kindness. You must be brave. I am vet. This means I kill all the animals. Sepp closed his eyes. Maybe I should write down some phrases you could use to talk about this stuff. Mario laughed and clapped him on the shoulder with a massive hand. My customers, they love how I am speaking. It's business. Now, as a contrast between the two of those, Murda had been introduced with this huge, big sort of dense description. You know, you really do need that sort of thing, and it's especially what, you know, they really are looking for that sort of stuff in folio. But getting people talking, and Murda has a huge sort of monologue, which is a real riff on Quint's speech in Jaws later on. You wouldn't love Mario in the same way at all if you didn't have him speaking there. So it's getting them speaking and having the confidence to use dialogue, and looking at how the characters in the book speak and applying it to their own writing, I think makes an enormous difference. So looking just here at the last slide on the summary of what I'm saying, the emphasis on process at all points, and I think in terms of especially introducing Riverkeep, the fluid nature of how it came about, I think, is something that really demystifies the process. And I'm always really keen to talk about the kids, to the kids, about this as just as a job, as work. It's not about the idea. You know, it's not that J.K. Rowling sat down and thought, all right, so he's 11, he finds out he's a wizard, boom, she's a billionaire. It's years of work and sitting on your own in a cafe. And, you know, I mean, I always like telling them about, you know, when I was sort of 21, 22, and I used to live around the corner from here, and my friends would go and, you know, watch the football on a Sunday at lunchtime and things, and I would stay and write a lot of the time, and it was seen as really strange, you know, but it's just work and time, and it's making mistakes and editing and reading and stealing and really just reflection, you know, writing things out and being able to put some sort of commentary on what they've done and being able to relate it to the class text and make that connection. The quest structure in Riverkeep here dictates all else. It's place, pace, plot, tone, character, incident, setting. It all comes from the shape of that journey that Will has to go on. Character is key, which we know, and dialogue is key to character. And pupils are scared to use it in their writing, and they shouldn't be, because it's a real gateway to writing some very honest and funny things a lot of the time. So using the class text as a basis of writing skills work and modelling. It's making sure those skills are demonstrated by us as leaders of learning in the classroom, us doing our own writing, printing it out, giving them a chance to critique us, and I mean, boy, do they love it. All these kids that have no idea where to begin editing their own work have loads of ideas when it comes to editing ours and pointing out mistakes that we've made, and it's, you know, if you've got a thick enough skin for it, it can make an enormous difference. So thank you very much. I've gone significantly over time, as I knew I would. I predicted this to Ian, our cameraman, at the start, and it's been fulfilled. So I was delighted to be invited to speak today, and if anybody would like to get in touch with any sort of follow-up questions or anything at all, you know, I'd be happy to make my contact details available through Duncan and the organisers. Thanks very much.